if you think about it, let's say you charge $200 a song to record and mix. A professional band is not even going to look at you, right?
Right.
Because they're just going to assume that your quality threshold is down at $200 a song, you know? All you got to change, double that rate, and then all of a sudden you are potentially attracting a completely different level of artists.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey rock stars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to meet with recording professionals, to hear their stories and learn from their experiences so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Jordan Valeriote, an independent producer, mixer, and engineer based out of Ontario, Canada, specializing in hardcore music with blazing guitars and drums. Jordan started out as an assistant engineer in 2007 at Cherry Beach Sound in Toronto, where he worked on recording sessions for Usher, Timbaland, Serena Ryder, and the Jonas Brothers, for example. But then he decided to create his own place, Sundown Studio in Guelph, Ontario, located in a remodeled barn on a beautiful natural farm setting. In 2010, he produced Rescue for the band Silverstein, a leading band in the post-hardcore scene. Follow-up credits include Antimacy by The Dead and Divine and Prophets for the Counterparts. Other credits include Nick Johnston, Forevermore, Great Lakes, Mandroid Echostar, and Skynet. Jordan is also an author, teacher, and an entrepreneur. He's taken all the knowledge gained from producing, recording, and mixing to create hardcoremusicstudio.com, where Jordan teaches you how to record, edit, and mix powerful hardcore records. He has written a book called Mixing Heavy Music, which you can find on Amazon, and he also offers drum sample packs made up of the very same drum samples used on many of his hardcore productions, which you can find on his website, hardcoremusicstudio.com. Please welcome Jordan Valeriote to Recording Studio Rockstars. Jordan, are you ready to rock?
I am definitely ready to rock. Thanks for having me.
But more importantly, are you ready to rock at hardcore, double kick, power chord speed? That's what I want to know.
Always. That's what I'm used to.
So Jordan, I've given my introduction. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you got into all this.
Yeah, thanks. That was a great intro. That pretty much sums it up. I guess you could say I really got started a few years before that assistant gig you mentioned. I took over a friend of mine's studio that he wanted to get out of the business, basically. So I got a loan from my dad, bought his gear, started renting the spot, and had no clue whatsoever what I was doing. Literally nothing. And just started recording my own bands and my friends' bands for free, and just started learning from there.
That's cool, man. I know this is a reach, but there's one other person I think of starting a studio in Canada, and this is silly because there's obviously many, but I always like the story of Daniel Lanois kind of starting up a studio up there with his brother. I don't know if you follow his work, but
I read his book, actually.
And, seeing pictures of your studio there, it's just so beautiful, the setting. I mean, you step out of the studio, what are you looking at? Trees and forest and woods and fields and stuff?
Pretty much, yeah. And it's crazy. Like, I was there for, about almost 10 years renting that spot. And yeah, it was great. It's funny now, like I drive down that street and there's subdivisions and development happening like all over. And I actually ended up having to move out of that place a year or two ago because the property got sold to a developer. So it's kind of a weird feeling because I drive by it knowing that that building where my studio was is probably going to be flattened and be townhouses.
Wow.
Soon. Yeah.
Well, welcome to Nashville, Tennessee. It's happening everywhere you turn. So now, would these be the pictures of Sundown Studio that I saw that look like, it almost has like a home, like well put together home basement studio look to the interior. And then you see the outside and it's clearly like this barn space that you were able to remodel.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a really unique thing. I was really lucky to get my hands on it because it's basically a guy who owned this big farm property, and he had built this separate garage / barn / shed building separate from the house. and he was just a hobbyist, and he had converted it into a little studio and never used it. So actually he rented it to someone he knew, and then I ended up taking it over from that guy. So it was really fortunate because probably starting out, I would not have had the means to, make a place that was like that. So,
yeah. Well, so at first glance, it struck me as a place where maybe you had a control room and then a nice glass and an ISO booth.
Yeah.
Pretty simple, straightforward. It's like, all right, go in there and record, and we're really close to each other as far as being able to see each other through the glass and all that.
Yeah, it was pretty small, like I'd say maybe 600 square feet total. Throughout the years, I did kind of like, with the owner's permission, I kind of remodeled it a bit and ended up with just a big control room and a live room that was about the same size. So, it certainly wasn't like amazing for recording drums and everything, but I still made it work and got really used to how the room sounded, and made a lot of records in there.
Well, I think that's actually exciting to hear because, the rock stars listening are going to more than likely be somebody with a studio where they feel the same way about their ability to get, natural sounding drums just the way they want. And it's cool. You've of course figured out a way to get great sounding drums for the music you're recording. And so we'll get into that stuff. Is there something about having a space like that where if there's one ISO room and that's your main ISO room, that might imply that typically you're kind of focusing on one overdub at a time? Is there an element of that to the music you're making and when you're recording hardcore?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how everyone does it anyway. Like it's certainly not like the Nashville style stuff where you've got a full band going live. It would just be like drums first, and then we tear down the drums, and then I would set up maybe a couple guitar amps and a bass amp all at the same time so that I could switch back and forth. But it's just one layer at a time for sure.
So you might be, for example, recording drums in the live room, but you might have a guitar player and a bass player sort of plugged in direct in the control room sitting right next to you or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. I'd do that for drum tracking if we needed to get like the guide guitar tracks or the ghost guitar tracks down. Then for the first couple takes of the drums, I'd have them just in the control room and they can see the drummer through the glass, and they'd play along with the first couple takes, and I'd record that. And as long as I did it good enough, then I'd say, okay, you can stop playing now. And I just use their tracks as we continue tracking. But
I don't want to go too deep down a rabbit hole here, but what are some takeaways for making sure that the guide track you're recording from that guitar player or that bass player is something that is accurate and not something that's steering you in the wrong direction?
Yeah, that can definitely happen. I guess like the easiest way to do it is to just get them to track it to a click without anything else. As long as they're reasonably skilled, they should be able to do that. And just take the time to get it done well enough. Like, don't just do one take, and then if they're off the click and stuff, like fix it so that the drummer's not getting thrown off, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, like I haven't had much issue. Like oftentimes if they are just tracking the ghost track with a drummer doing a drum take, they might do it better than just doing it with the click. So, I mean, just feel it out with the band. I mean, the most ideal situations I've had is when we've actually had time to maybe do some pre-production and some demoing ahead of time. And so at that point, so maybe I have like some really rough drums with just guitar DIs. And then when it comes to actually track it for real, I've already got the guide stuff in there. And then I can just literally just go and start replacing those tracks with the real takes. So
you might actually do pre-production in the studio as opposed to in a totally different environment?
Yeah, I used to do that a lot actually towards the last few years I was working there. I would always schedule, a few days or weeks, depending on the project, ahead of time. And for pre-production, I would put like, kick and snare mic and 2 overheads. And then I'd get everyone in the live room and just have everyone mic'd up, just really minimal setup, and actually go through the songs and then just do a live take so that, we can just work on the arrangement, and then they can have a recording of any changes we've made, Then, when we go to track for real, we set up more mics and do it that way.
Well, the beauty about pre-production, of course, is that you have, it's a lot of cats to wrangle, so that is a challenge, but you have this instant flexibility too. It's like, all right, everybody, let's try this. And now you've got everybody trying it. Whereas when you try and do that, in overdub land, it just gets hard to see the forest for the trees sometimes,
Yeah, I totally agree. And I don't know, I just find it makes the recording process so much easier if you can do that, because everyone's on the same page. we've already kind of made most decisions ahead of time. Of course, some things change during overdubs, but for the most part, it's just when you come to actually track the real thing, it's very straightforward. You're just focusing on getting the best performances and the best tones and everything, and not changing the song, as you're recording.
Well, I imagine a challenge for the music you're doing. So Rockstars, this is like really in your face hardcore music. I mean, we're talking about like just right walls of guitars, high speed drums that are really cutting through and punching in the right way. Vocals, of course, are going to be intense, but probably not having to worry about that initially. Yeah. But I would imagine that a challenge for you is making sure that the drums that you record have the proper intensity when you're tracking, when you don't yet have a wall of guitars to track to.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I never really thought about that. I mean, I definitely, try to get the drummer to hit as hard as they can, as long as they've got decent technique and stuff. But yeah, a lot of it is like, especially with younger and experienced bands, like unfortunately you end up, having to rely on some samples after the fact. But I always obviously try to get as good as possible up front.
Mm-hmm. What are the things in the live drum kit that are most usable in the end mix?
For me, I'd say the most usable, I mean, I'll always record live drums if I can. I'm not like a program drums guy.
Right.
Yeah. So like cymbals, I'll always use. I'll never like replace that. That's just way too much of a pain. And pretty much, and toms now, I used to use tom samples a bit, but now I've just figured out ways to pretty much make any tom tracks work 90% of the time. So nice. I rarely use tom samples. Yeah, but kick and snare.
I can send you my crappiest tom recording and you can help me out.
Yeah, I'll take that challenge. Yeah.
All right, cool, man. Well, that's pretty hit, man. And I appreciate that. And of course, you're trying to get the best drum recording you can live. But as we know, sometimes you just get to the end and it's like, something's not where it needed to be. Yeah. For me, I find most often that is the snare drum, or the kick.
Yeah.
But it's cool to know that those, the thing that is never going to get replaced really is the cymbals and the hi-hat and all that stuff.
Yeah. And in that way, I've always found like, even on, with the worst, sketchiest drummers, like even if I'm replacing the kick and the snare and the toms like 100%, if I still have those cymbals and I still have like the room tracks, it still sounds better to me than like a fully programmed track. There's just something about, real instruments in a room recording. I just think it's better. It makes the recording more unique. So
yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And I mean, if you ever go back in your mind, if you think about John Bonham playing in Led Zeppelin, you think powerful drums,
Yeah.
And then if you go listen to it with your critical, post-production ear, you begin to notice you're like, like each snare isn't sounding exactly the same, or the kick isn't, cutting through, but the way it all adds up is what makes it sound powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, cool stuff. Well, so Jordan, I like to ask our guests to share with us an inspirational quote to start off the podcast. Is there anything you'd like to share that gets us excited about recording in the studio?
Well, I came across this quote by Chris Lord-Alge a while ago, and he said, "There's no wrong way to make a sound. No one is going to die."
Nice.
And I love that because just interacting with a lot of the people I try to teach online, like they're always coming at me with these questions about like the gain staging and what dB should they be hitting and all these like rules, or like they're afraid of EQing more than 3 dB or something. And it was just like, listen, like you don't have to worry about that. If you have to EQ at 10 dB and it sounds awesome, like just do it, and so I love that quote.
I think that's a very insightful quote. And I actually remember, I've been doing this for a while, but I remember all those feelings. I remember
me too,
wanting to know stuff. Things like, how many dB should I compress my 2-bus compressor, when I'm sending the mix through it, like there was a rule for it. Yeah. How much, should I boost or should I cut with EQ?
Yeah.
How loud should the bass be or whatever? And another one too, remember feeling that great mystery of, well, what's the difference between a mix and the mastered mix? And if only I could hear the song that was mixed on one of my favorite records before it got mastered, that would give me all the answers.
Exactly.
And I feel like the reason we ask those questions is because whether you're just starting out, you're right in the middle, or you're where you're at now, you're always struggling with something, right? There's always some new height that we're trying to reach. Mm-hmm. And the fear of not being able to reach that and make it good enough yet, there's like an instinct that defaults to, maybe I can just find a rule that I can follow for that next thing I'm trying to figure out.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there's just the fear of like that you're doing something wrong or that you're going to ruin it or something, and it's really, when you dig down, it's a totally unnecessary fear. But yeah, I can totally relate to that too. I've definitely gone through that.
So, another quote that I always kind of like to share is, there's no bad microphones. There's just bad choices of which microphone to use.
Yeah, I like that.
Because even the crappiest mics and sounds, always, you can find places for them. If you're making art records.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, Jordan, you've done a lot of cool stuff with your recording, with your career, and you're teaching now. Help us understand that it wasn't always so perfect for you. Can you share a story with us about kind of an important fail for you along the way that maybe turned into a great learning experience?
Yeah, I guess it's hard for me to think about things in terms of a failure, but I've certainly made many mistakes. One of the funny ones that comes to mind is like, I was a few years into this, doing it full time. I was recording an album with a band in my studio, and we go to track vocals, and so he goes in front of the mic, and I'm like, all right, let's do a take, see how it sounds. So he starts singing, and it just sounds wrong. It sounds bizarre. It sounds like there's like a really extreme high pass filter on it, or like some distortion. It just sounds very small and filtery almost, his voice. So I'm like, okay, I've done something wrong. What's going on here? So I'm checking my chain. I'm in the control room. I'm like repatching things. I'm trying different channels, different preamps, different channels on my converters. I'm taking the compressor in and out. I'm switching my patch bay cables and all this stuff. I'm going behind my whole rack. And meanwhile, I'm burning this guy out because I'm asking him to do take after take as I'm trying to figure this out. And it's always sounding the same. So this goes on for like probably almost an hour. And obviously I'm feeling like an idiot, like what's going on? I can't figure out why my signal chain is not sounding good. Hold on,
dude. Don't sing your best take yet. I'm almost there.
Yeah, exactly. So, and he was super gracious. He's like, yeah, no problem, man. But I'm trying to figure it out, and I'm feeling worse by the minute. So I got to the point where I've tried everything. And then so I'm like, okay, dude, I'm just going to like come in the room with you and like hear how it sounds. And so I go into the live room and get him to sing along with the take. And it's just like in the room, I hear his voice, and that's how his voice sounds. I'm like, I've never heard anything like it. Like it's not that he was a bad singer, but just the quality of his voice was it was very bizarre. It sounded distorted and like filtered. I've never heard anything like it.
Wow.
But it was just like, then I felt like such an idiot because I'm like, oh, okay, sorry, dude. I wasted an hour of your time and made you sing pointless takes for an hour while I was figuring out. Like basically had to tell him, I thought your voice sounded bad and I was trying to fix it. But now I see that that's just how it sounds. So let's record now.
Wow, man. Wow. That's a tough one to get out of, isn't it?
Yeah. But I guess the lesson out of that is just like start at the source always, even if it's a simple like vocalist and the vocal mic, like if there's something weird, at least make sure that it's not what it actually sounds like out of the guy's throat, or any other source.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I was trying to think of sort of a bailout strategy for something like that. Like, do you tell the guy that you thought his voice was messed up all this time, or do you just own it? You're like, oh, man, I'm so sorry. I just discovered the bad patch and it's been my fault. I'm just going to copy you an hour just to make sure he feels great and still wants to make his record. I don't know.
I know. I feel like by the time I figured it out, I was too far gone. Like
he already knew something was up, right?
Yeah. Because when I was first trying to fix the problem, I was already saying like that it sounded bad, and then I was trying to fix it. And sorry, I would want to like get going on doing these takes, but it just doesn't sound good. So I need to fix it. So I was too far gone.
That's funny. As far as knowing what the source sound is like, that I find that's something that's learned too, because if you're used to hearing guitar amps like overly loud and drums that sound kind of boxy and crazy sounding in your rehearsal space, it might be hard to know right away whether something's sounding right or wrong in the recording space of a studio, before you go and listen on the speakers. Yeah. But it's true. This everything from the kick drum, when it's not working, it's like go out and look at the kick drum and give it a listen. Like go sit in front of the kick drum, have them hit.
Yeah.
Tune the head slightly, put a pillow up against the head, tighten it, remove a head, and you can hear all these remarkable differences.
Oh yeah, definitely. Totally agree.
Well, so now how about something along the way for you that felt like a real big break moment, a moment of success?
Yeah, a big thing is in your intro you mentioned I worked as an assistant slash kind of intern at a studio in Toronto for about 6 months. And while I was there, probably the most impactful week, the biggest kind of aha time that I had was when the Jonas Brothers were making some of their record there. So, I mean, I know when people hear that, they think, some Disney boy band, fake stuff, whatever. But it's like, if you listen to the record, it's a legit rock record. It's live drums. It's good players. The Jonas Brothers themselves were actually very talented. So yeah, they were there for about 6 days, and I was working as an assistant there. So I basically got to just stand in the room and help out with setup and stuff, and just witness the whole thing go down. And the producer, his name is John Fields. He's done obviously that Jonas Brothers record, which went platinum actually. And what else, like Switchfoot and some other notable things. Just watching him work, it was just like, it was such a light bulb, because the way he worked, it was not about the gear at all. Like, he knew what gear he wanted to use and he knew how to set it up, but he set everything up quickly. He didn't, like, I was used to back at my studio, like, agonizing over how many mics I'm going to put on the guitar cab and where I'm going to put them. And I'm trying 10 different placements out,
Yeah.
And he's just like, I want a 57 and a ribbon mic. And he just literally like went into the live room and just put them both up side by side. It probably took him 1 minute, and he went in the controller, and that was it. Like, didn't adjust it. Same with the drums, like a little more in depth on the drums, but still he obviously had his mics, his placements that he had used before, and just did that and didn't really mess around with stuff. It was so much more about the music and the takes, and almost like doing the setup work ahead of time, so that when it was time to create the music and track, the gear almost like disappeared. Like, it wasn't a factor. It never slowed down the session at all. And that, like, totally, just the speed that he worked like that, it totally changed my mindset on how to produce and engineer a record.
Well, so now what happened? I'm guessing he and the Jonas Brothers and you as an assistant spent time on something. Was it something other than getting tweaky about sounds?
Well, it was pretty cool how they did it. Like, so basically he came in, so the producer came up with also a session drummer. So they came up like the day before and they set everything up. So we had, in the live room, we had the drums mic'd, we had guitar amps mic'd, we had a piano mic'd, and we had different areas set up for vocals and overdubs. So every possible instrument that they could track was ready to go right away. So that by the time it was time to track with the Jonas Brothers or without them, there was no setup after that first day. It was like, oh, I want to lay down some pianos. Just like in the moment, he would say he wants to do some piano or some shaker or something, and he could easily just run out to the live room and just track it. Like,
I love sessions like that.
Yeah. So I was like, wow, that's so smart. That makes so much sense, because I was used to being in the studio and somebody would be like, oh, I've got an idea for this guitar part. And then you spend 15 minutes like setting it up and getting the sound and everything. And then, the moment kind of goes a little bit, but he was,
or worse yet, you schedule a session for next week to do the guitar.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It was very much just about the vibe, and he kind of how it would work, because the actual Jonas Brothers were filming a movie in Toronto at the time. So they'd be filming all day. So they would come in at night with their song ideas. They kind of do like a rough, like acoustic demo of the song, work on it with the producer very fast, maybe track the actual vocals too. But then they'd say like, okay, we want it to sound like this. We want to, do a little cool cut on the bridge like this or whatever. Then they'd leave for the night. And then the next morning, the producer, John Fields, would come in, and him and the session drummer would start. They would literally lay down the whole song, drums, bass, guitars, piano, whatever. So that by the time the filming was over for the Jonas Brothers, they would come in, lay down some of the lead vocals, and then do the demo of the next song.
Oh, wow,
so it was
cool.
like, you're in the room there like, well, this guy's literally recording an entire rock song, that would go on to be mixed by Chris Lord-Alge and be platinum, and he's just doing each song in a day. And he just like, he works so fast, and also just seeing like, he'd be recording something, so there was also a session guitar player. So he'd be maybe recording a guitar overdub, and while the guitar is being recorded, he's like somewhere else on the screen in Pro Tools, and he's listening to the take, but he's also like editing something else at the same time. It was just like, he was so fast, like, and I think that's what made him so efficient in how he could track all that stuff. And it sounded like a record, like right from the get-go. I remember going to the store and buying the finished record months later, because it was mixed by CLA. And I remember putting it on the record, and it was like, man, like the drums sound really close to what I heard in the control room and other stuff too. So it was it was pretty amazing.
So your perspective on it was that he was getting it right in the first place.
Exactly, yeah. And he wasn't afraid to like, he was using a lot of plugins too, and Pro Tools, like, TDM plugs as he's tracking so that it was as close as possible to what he wanted the finished sound to be like.
Right. I like that when you can do that. That's great.
Yeah. So that was cool too.
Yeah. And so Rockstars, the idea of that, just to translate a little bit, is TDM plugins in Pro Tools means you can leave the plugin on while you're recording. And they tend to have like a pretty low latency, especially if you stick to the stock plugins and things like that. Yeah. So it's that concept of creating a sound and committing to it while you're recording it so that it doesn't have to get recreated later.
Yeah, exactly. It's not one of those situations where you're making a record with the band and you're like, okay, I know it sounds like a little lame right now, but trust me, when I mix it, it's going to sound better. It's not like that at all. It was like he had it sounding like close to a record right off.
That does kind of help your ego a little bit as a mixer, but it doesn't necessarily help the record get better as it's getting made, right?
Oh, you mean like if you're not
to leave
mixing
it for later, to leave it for the mix.
Agreed. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, let's dig into, this style of music a little bit that you do so well. How would you explain to our listeners what hardcore music is?
It's just, very aggressive. These days it's pretty technical, I'd say, like especially towards the metal side. For me growing up, it was very like interesting to listen to hardcore metal bands who are doing stuff with like time signatures changing all the time and just kind of weird stuff. And obviously just very heavy, aggressive, screaming vocals. I love doing like lots of melodic singing vocals too, but a lot of these bands have yelling, screaming vocals, distorted guitars the whole way. And like you said, really heavy banging drums.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And drums that are quick kind of too, right? Because they got to cut through that wall of guitars. You can't have a snare just go like big sloshy bong. You hit it.
Yeah, a lot of it's very fast too. Yeah.
And watching some of the videos on your site with you guys doing guitar overdubs on your sessions, I see these guys. Maybe it looked like one of them was playing like a 7-string guitar, and he's doing all kinds of fast stuff. But one of the remarkable things is there's a sound that exists in this kind of music where you're just kind of. You're not really playing a note. It's just distortion, muted distortion that just goes,
Yes, yeah.
Is there a name for that?
Yeah, like chugs.
Chugs. All right, cool, man. Yeah. Chugs. Chugs is the term of the day for this podcast.
Yeah. Or you could call it like in those sections where it kind of, it's just it's just, they call it like a breakdown where it's just like really heavy chugs on the open strings. Yeah.
All right, so I think of chugs as being a supportive element for the drums. Like in that moment, it's like about the drum part, and the chugs just make it sound like there's a monster in the band. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's almost kind of similar to just like really, it's very rhythmic, like you're saying, and it's almost similar to like just like a hip hop groove, that's just a single note just with a kick drum pattern.
Yeah, and then what about the vocals? So you've got melodic stuff that comes, and I actually have a new intern here who was telling me he's way into hardcore music, but he called it like hardcore pop or something, and it sounded like it was a cross between Linkin Park doing a melodic vocal and this heavy kind of screamo voice. Talk about a little bit about the screaming vocal, and like I don't even know the right questions to ask because it's not the music I usually listen to, but what's the most fun part about screaming vocals being the lead vocal part of a song?
I don't know. I don't know. I think every vocalist has just a unique way that they do it. It sounds kind of funny to say it because it's screaming, but a lot of guys are very polished at it. So they could stand in front of the mic and deliver the same scream performance, like take after take, which is pretty impressive. I can't do it at all. But then there's other guys who are very like, it's just way more like raw and emotional, and they might blow out their voice after a couple of days,
Yeah.
So you never know which one you're going to get, and you kind of have to work differently with either of them. But even though I think from the outside, if you're not familiar with the music, it just sounds like some dude just screaming, and what's so good about that? But
it sounds like the voice track from Hellraiser, the movie, or something. Some guy talking at me being the devil. But I know it's got to be more than that. This isn't like, it might sound that way, but that's not the message or the intent of every song, right?
No, yeah, it's there's such a variety, and you can really do it so many ways. You can just do it straight up raw, or you can, I guess what your guy said, like the pop hardcore, or like the melodic metalcore stuff is they actually go to, quite great lengths producing the screaming vocals, and different layers and stacking and all that, and special effects and everything. Yeah.
Is it typical that the person who's doing the screaming vocals and the melodic vocal are two different singers in the band trading off?
Yeah, that's pretty common, but sometimes you do get guys who can do both, which is pretty cool.
Right on, man. What are some things, let's say we do get a chance to record screaming hardcore or screamo, if I'm using the right terminology. What are some vocal tricks that we might want to know about to get great vocal sounds for the kind of the screaming vocal?
You want to make them like comfortable, like any vocalist, right? But it could be a little different for this, like, because a lot of these guys are used to, playing live and having a mic right in their hands, right up against their mouth, right?
Right, so, and they're hunched over and they're like pacing on the stage, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for the longest time, I've used the SM7 for screaming and singing, but definitely for screaming. And I just put the pop filter on there, and some guys like it on the mic stand, or some guys like it off, and they can just hold that mic and do it like they would live, and that way it's a lot more comfortable for them.
That makes perfect sense, and that's really great advice. That actually applies to every form of recording, and it's cool to be reminded about that for vocal stuff. When there's an intensity to the vocal or an emotion to it, you got to like untether yourself from the idea of a expensive tube mic perfectly positioned on a stand that you can't touch, and you have to stand 3 inches from it or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there certain mics that don't do well for a handheld vocal mic that you've found yourself steering away from? Or ones, you mentioned the SM7. Is that always just a great go-to for a handheld?
That's always a great go-to because they can move it around and you don't hear that. And there's a big area for them to hold on to. I've also used, believe it or not, 421s for this type of vocal. Mm-hmm. And actually, if you put the roll-off filter like at the first or second position, it's like perfect. It's really aggressive sounding, and same thing. They can hold it in their hands. They can put it right up to their mouth, move it around. But basically, you want to get a mic that's not gonna make noise if they're moving it around in their hands, and also that they have a good area to grip onto. That's not going to affect the sound, as if they're cupping over the diaphragm or something.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point. The Sennheiser 421 Rockstars has got a roll off. It's sort of like a rotary thing on the end where the mic clip goes in, right? Where the XLR goes in. And so rolling off the low end makes it easier to just get really close on the mic and eat it, because it's not going to, be too boomy on your voice, right?
Yeah.
What about mic cables? Is that sort of an issue as far as handling noise when you're recording? Have you found that you always have to have a really good cable, or can you just kind of swap them out?
I've never really paid that much attention to cables. Like I don't buy the cheapest ones ever, but I don't spend tons of money on them or anything. And I've never had an issue with cables falling out or making noise or anything.
All right, there you go. Once again, Lidge looking for problems where they don't exist. I love it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the drums again a little bit more. Now, in cases where you want to have the kick and the snare doing the right thing, how would you describe typically what the kick drum is doing live in the room and what the snare drum are doing? And then maybe we'll move into what they might be doing in Pro Tools at mix stage.
What do you mean exactly by like what they're doing in the room?
Let's start with the kick. Describe to me everything from the beater to maybe the tempo of the song to, do we have two heads on the kick drum? Do we put a lot of padding and stuffing in the kick drum? All those kind of things.
Yeah, so it varies with genre. So if you're doing like a fast metal thing, you definitely want like a really pointy attack, and you don't need tons of low end from it. So I tend to try to suggest the drummers use smaller kick drums, which helps them play faster too. And I usually keep both heads on though, but I do have the hole in the front head and mic inside it, kind of halfway. Usually dampened, like you said, with blankets or pillows in there too. But I'm really trying to get, and I should say, like in terms of the beater, usually using like the plastic side of it, and you can get these little stickers. You've probably seen like on the kick drum heads, I don't know, they're called attack pads or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so usually those with like plastic beater helps a lot get that kind of clicky kick drum sound on the top end. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's kind of like the setup there. And yeah.
Now, what about miking up the kick drum during the session? Do you like to use a couple of mics on the kick or just one?
It depends. For like more stuff towards the more rock side, I like to use like a sub kick or something if it's available. on the outside, and I always go for a D112 on the inside pretty much. But if it's like more straight up fast metal stuff, I'll just do the inside mic, because it just, when you've got a lot of kick and it's really fast, like there's not room for the extra sub.
So one way to describe it, Rockstars, would potentially be the inner mic tends to get the quick kick drum, and the outer mic is, and the sub mic that you're talking about picks up low end and even the sustain of the drum head, right?
Yeah.
So if your song musically doesn't have enough time in between kick drums for the kick drum to sustain from one kick to the next, you're going to find there's less use for that outer mic. Does that sound about right for you?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, cool. Now, what about the snare? What are some typical things that might happen to a snare that makes it, make it from start to finish?
I mean, picking a good snare drum is obviously key. Personally, I like kind of thicker, beefier sounding snares with a lot of low end. So I'm always hoping to get a snare that's like at least 6 inches deep. And yeah, new heads on them. I like the controlled sound heads with the dot in the middle, a little less ringy. But I would just mic it like with 57 on top and bottom. And I mean, that's pretty much it. For the snare, I just find it comes down so much to how the drummer hits it.
Yeah.
That's like 80% of the sound.
What about metal snares and wooden snares? Do you find a preference there?
Yeah, I prefer metal snares for sure for this type of music.
Yeah, so they just tend to be sort of louder and have a sharper attack? Yeah,
louder, more bite, just cuts through better.
Now, how about sort of like the typical struggle that people run into where they're like, there's a ring in the snare. How can you comment on that? What does that even mean?
Yeah, just like just like a tone that's like sustaining, in between hits. That's always a problem. In quotes, I have to say problem. I think early on, like I used to always try to kill that as much as I could, like putting tape around the edges of the snare head, using the moon gels, which are definitely super useful. But kind of over the years, I actually started letting a lot more of that through, because as you're tracking drums and you're only listening to the drums, you might think that the ring is like a problem. But I've found that by the time you get all the other layers on for the song and you go to mix it, if you've killed all the sustain on your snare, it's just way too small in your mix. It's very short because you just get the attack.
Yeah.
And you don't have that body to make the snare heard in the mix and to give it character. So these days, like I'll try to dampen it a bit if it's crazy, but I actually like to try and keep some ring in there, because by the time you get to mix time, that is actually really helpful in defining the snare in the mix, I find.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You get to the final mix and somehow your snare, it's there and you can hear it, but it doesn't seem to have the life that the rest of the song has, because maybe it got too deadened.
Exactly, yeah. And I get that a lot.
It's sort of harder to bring the life back into a snare than it is to just sort of gate it out at mix time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I don't know, for snares, I found like there's no other way for me to describe it than saying that the snare needs to have a length to it. Like if all you've got is transient, it's not going to show up in the mix, especially in like a dense, heavy mix like the stuff that I'm working on. Like it has to be, I'm literally talking about like time-wise. Like if you looked at a transient on the screen or whatever, like if you just have that one spike, it's like, it's going to get totally lost in the mix. But if it's long and fat, it has some length to it, then that helps so much.
Yeah, I remember I was reading a book. I don't know if it was This Is Your Brain on Music, but it was talking about just the physics of sound. And one of them was that, perceived loudness is increased through time, and I think through harmonic content.
Yes.
So what you just described, a snare drum hitting, if it comes and goes too quickly, it's all transient and there's not enough time for you to perceive it as being loud.
Exactly, yeah.
But give it the sustain and it actually sounds louder even if it's not.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to say it.
All right, cool. So now what about in the mix stage for snare and kick? What you want to share anything about adding when we've got a lackluster kick or a lackluster snare? What are some first moves to look at as far as improving the sound of those?
Okay, I'll start with kick because I think it's easier. I could usually get a pretty decent sound out of the kick, even if it's not the greatest source. you can just like EQ it a lot. And this is something that I kind of saw watching some videos or whatever from Chris Lord Alge mixing. But if you check out like the presets he made for the Waves plugins, it's just like he's got like 8K cranked all the way on the top end of the kick drum.
Yeah.
So I started messing around with that and it was like, oh, that's the sound I'm hearing on record. So, I mean, with kick, you can really like, the classic thing is like a really big top end boost, like around 5 or 8K. And then a really big cut in the mid range, depends on the kick, but if it's more muddy sounding, then you do a big cut around, 250, 300. If it's more kind of boxy sounding, then do a big cut a little higher up, like 700 to 900 hertz. And again, like I'll have the SSL channel plug-in up and just cut that all the way down, like -9, -15 dB, and then a big boost on the bottom too. So you just end up big boost on top, big boost on the bottom, and a huge dip in the middle. And that's like the modern kick sound, right?
There you have a smiling kick right there.
Yeah, and since if you're miking it, especially from the inside like I do, you can really do a lot of EQ with it without, getting too much crazy bleed.
So I have a little bit of a theory for why it is that we need to do so much, why pulling the mids out of a kick makes such a big difference.
Okay.
And might be true or not, but we're inside a kick drum with a microphone. It's like being in a really small room, where where all that sound's bouncing around in there. And I feel like there's just a mode inside the kick that you wouldn't hear when you're standing away from the kick.
Yeah.
And it's probably why it gets so boxed up in that 250 to 500 range, is because you're inside this tiny room listening to the sound of a kick drum.
Yeah, exactly. You'd never hear a kick drum like that.
Yeah.
Normally, right?
All right, cool, man. My theory's not bunk this time.
No.
Good. All right. So now what about the snare drum? What kind of stuff can we do for the snare, on the control room side of it to try and make sure it really is improving?
Yeah, it's and this can be tougher. Again, a lot of times like I end up relying on samples if the drummer's not hitting it very well, because it makes such a big difference. But let's assume decent drummer. So I would start with EQ again, and again, like maybe around 8K, a generous boost, pretty much as I can get out of it without the cymbal bleed being too crazy. And then another mid-range, high mid boost, between 2, 3K usually. And then boosting kind of low end of the snare on 200 hertz. I'm sure all of this is like universal across a lot of genres too, these frequencies for snare. Right. And then, I like to EQ into a compressor with, slower attack. So just to emphasize the transient there. And actually one huge tip I can give for snare is saturation and even distortion. I kind of stumbled upon that a while ago, and it made a huge difference. And it goes back to what you were saying about perceived loudness and being with length and harmonic content. If you can distort the snare, whether it's like right on the track or in parallel, it's crazy. Like I've done free videos on this. I don't know if you saw, but it's like I use the lo-fi plugin on snare. And just a little bit of it, and it's crazy because if you watch the meter, it's the level is like not changing, but it literally sounds twice as loud. So that allows you to really get a powerful, loud snare in the mix without, the classic thing of like you turn up the snare and your meters are jumping all over the place,
Right, and your head's being punched by the speakers.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's great, man. That's a great trick. Do you want to drop a reference to your YouTube channel right now while people are listening?
Yeah, just go on YouTube and search Hardcore Music Studio. I've got a bunch of free tips out there, and if you join my email list at hardcoremusicstudio.com, that's kind of where I give out most of my free stuff, or maybe the more premium stuff. Yeah,
and then you also have been kind enough to set us up with a link to a pretty cool mix cheat sheet that you've got, right? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll tell rock stars where to find it?
Yeah, so it's just this quick reference guide I made. I mean, it's kind of funny, like reading comments on posts that I made about this cheat sheet. People say, "There's no cheat sheet. You have to use your ears. You have to learn." It's like, okay, yeah, but that's not the point. Like, so the cheat sheet basically lists like all the common instruments and tracks that you'd have for, typical rock or heavy songs. So, kick, snare, toms, bass, guitars, vocals. And then each column, it tells you frequencies where you can look to boost, frequencies where you can look to cut, and then compressor tips, all there for each different track. So it's obviously not the be all and end all of that. It's just like a starting point. It's like, I think beginners sometimes they know they need to do something to the kick or to the guitar, but they don't know where to start.
Right.
So at least with this kind of reference, they'd say, okay, this sheet's saying that for snare, I could try boosting at 8K. Okay, I'll try that. So they do. And then that just gets you started, and maybe they adjust it from there. But I think it's just meant to be really useful starting points, just to kind of get out of a rut and maybe just get you moving instead of just scratching your head.
Well, I think what's cool about it too is it looks like it's about 8.5 by 11, so you can print it out and you can just sort of set it on the console right next to you and just glance at it. I mean, the whole concept of is there a cheat or is there not a cheat? Listen, I use a calendar on my phone as a helpful reminder for what I'm supposed to do every day. It doesn't mean that I can't remember some of those things on my own if I wanted to. So, Rockstars, if you want to get that, you can actually just go to rsrockstars.com/cheatsheet, and that'll take you right to it. And just a reminder, cheat is CHEAT and sheet is SHEET. So rsrockstars.com/cheatsheet. We're going to take a break here for a minute, and then we'll come back in for the jam session. Rockstars, I'll include links to all the stuff we're talking about in the show notes on the website. And you can just click through if you're listening on your iPhone. Just go to the logo for this episode playing, touch it, it'll turn into the show notes. You can just click through with your finger and go straight to the links, go straight to the website. And we'll see you guys in just a moment for the jam session. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks, and you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, Rockstars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Hey Rockstars, it's Lid Shaw, and we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Jordan Valeriote from hardcoremusicstudio.com. Jordan, are you ready to jam?
I'm ready.
Awesome, dude. When you were starting out in recording, what was one of the biggest things that was holding you back?
Besides not knowing anything at all, I'd say thinking I had to go to school first.
Okay, so you did or did not go to school first?
I did not. I was very close to. It was near where I live, like the best program. It was a 2-year program, but in order to get into it, you had to do like a year of it was called General Arts before that. So I did the year of General Arts, got accepted to the production program, but actually right at that exact time, my buddy in Guelph was unloading his studio, so I just took it over instead of going to school.
So interesting. So you sort of basically did that move that I always hear people hypothetically talking about, which is, geez, if you could take your money and pay tuition somewhere, or you could just take it and go start up your studio, you know, which one would you do? But it's always hypothetical. You actually did it. And
that actually happened.
So give us a takeaway. I mean, I know your takeaway is, hey, it worked out, but were there times where where you thought, man, maybe I should have gone to school? Or did you right away feel like this was the best move, just getting into it and getting started?
I think right away I knew it was the best move because, even a few months in, like I got to be in the studio every day and I was having fun and I was I was learning. I mean, it was definitely slow and I didn't know a lot of the basics, but, especially after those 2 years had gone by where I would have been in school, like I already had a bunch of, was starting my discography, and even though it wasn't significant and my stuff still didn't sound that good, it was like I was already 2 years ahead of those guys who were just then starting to get into the real world. So I think it gave me a jump start. I will say, like, it was slow in terms of like how quickly my quality progressed. Because when you're teaching yourself, it's hard. It takes a long time to make all the mistakes yourself as opposed to learning from someone else. So I will say it took me a while in those first couple of years. And then once I got that intern gig, it kind of really sped me up a lot. But yeah, I think it was the right move for sure.
So a couple of thoughts. One is when you're in school, as I remember, because I went to school for this, at the beginning of the semester, we still had to go to the computer room back then, And so we go to the computer lab and then log on to these old computers and go through the most complex scheduling system ever just to try and get our, 16 or 20 hours in the studio for the entire semester, Whereas, you had your own studio and you're in there for, I'm sure you were probably in there for like 15, 16 hours a day, every single day at that point.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And again, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with the schools necessarily. But I just, I don't know. I think you can, especially these days with the internet, what it is, like you can learn so much, and maybe you just need to put a little more effort into finding other opportunities to learn from people. But I mean, there's definitely downsides. Like since I started on my own like that with Pro Tools and barely not knowing anything about even Pro Tools at all. And then there were certainly scenarios like later on down the road in my career where I'd go to work in a room with like a big console or something, and I needed like a crash course on how to set it all up and use it, right? Because I'd never had that foundation. So, I mean, it's good to get that stuff from school. And I'd say just if you're going to do that, just be really intentional and try to get as much time as you can and make connections and all that.
So when you were learning this stuff, what resources were you using to learn from, and how is that different today for somebody who's trying to teach themselves?
Yeah, back then I subscribed to the magazines like EQ and Mix Magazine. So I'd soak those up. And other than that, it was really just the Gearslutz forum. I would spend hours and hours on there reading stuff, which is good and bad. But yeah.
Have you had any epic battles on Gearslutz, without name dropping, that you can share stories about?
Not on that one specifically.
Or have you seen any epic battles?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like we've all seen like the 400-page threads about which, converter is better or whatever. It's like, I've had some other stuff on other forums. Like there's this really well-known metal producer named Andy Sneap. And there was like a community forum based around his work, but a lot of like metal producers hung out there, and I was posting there, and so I definitely got into some battles there, but nothing crazy.
Well, cool, man. Well, so now you're also teaching now. Tell us a little bit about the stuff you're teaching, and Rockstars, if you're interested in learning outside of school and just using these internet resources like Jordan's created to learn more about hardcore music and recording and mixing. Tell us a little bit about what you've got for us there.
Yeah, so I've got some mixing courses, an editing course, and basically the idea is like I started thinking back and thinking, the biggest breakthroughs for me when I was coming up and learning was, when I got the chance to either be in the room with a pro who was already, doing it professionally and making real records, watching what they're doing, or just having conversations with people and asking them what they're doing. So that was kind of always where I made my biggest breakthroughs. And it could happen really quickly. If you just get like that one piece of advice, it can really change things for you. But people now just in their basements or in these small studios, basically in their little cave with no outside input at all, it's hard to get those experiences. So I'm just trying to use the internet as a way to give that to people. And I call it kind of giving them a virtual intern opportunity so they can watch the screen and listen to me as I'm going through a mix that I did for, not some obscure thing, like for an actual record label release, and say, okay, this is what the kick sounded like. Here's what I did to it to get it to the finished product, and just break down an entire mix as if they were in the room with me as I was mixing it. So that's kind of the goal, and that's how I'm trying to help people learn and get better at this.
Cool, man. Well, so now we'll jump forward to the rest of our questions here. What was some of the best advice you received, about recording and learning how to do it yourself?
Probably just to get it right at the source as much as you can.
So make sure your drums really do sound good so you don't have to replace them in the mix.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know who told me, but they were saying, when it comes to your signal chain, the most important thing is the player, then the instrument, then the mic, and then, preamp or whatever comes after that. But just keeping that in your head of knowing that that's the order of importance of what's going to determine the final sound.
Okay, very quickly, you do a lot of guitars and you do a lot of heavy guitars.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for us as far as, because I know the difference between minimal stuff between the guitar and the amp and pedal boards and what those different sounds are like. What's some quick takeaway advice for getting great heavy guitar sounds and not messing it up by putting the wrong stuff, in between the player and the amp and all that?
Yeah. So my thing with guitars is less is more. Keep it simple. Lots of guys, especially in the heavy music genre, they like to put 3 mics on the guitar cab, and then they'll do like 4 layers of the rhythm guitars for each side. And you just don't have to do that. And it actually sounds worse and starts sounding smaller the more you do that. So my tip for heavy guitars is, like, for the most part, I'm just using a single 57 on the cab in the right spot, and then just getting really, really tight, clean takes, one on the left, one on the right for rhythms. And that's it. Like, the size and the power of your guitars is going to come from tight, solid performances, or things are all hitting at the same time. That's where it comes from. It doesn't come from putting 8 layers on top of each other. Yeah.
So now one of the things that I've certainly run into is guitar player shows up, they got a full pedal rig. They're used to that working great for their live shows.
Yeah.
But I put a mic on it and it sounds like, somebody's taking a weed eater to my ear.
Right. Yeah.
So, and then I'll go out and I'll say, hey, how about are you using all these pedals? How about we skip them and go straight into the amp and just turn the amp up more?
Yeah.
Is that something that you practice a lot too? Do you find that most of your guitar players are going to need a boost pedal or a heavy distortion pedal on the way to the amp? And is there some balance that always seems to work better? Is it better to like crank the amp up and use less of the pedal, for example?
Yeah, I pretty much always use the amp distortion. I do often use a tube screamer pedal in front, but I have the overdrive on that, like at 0, and I'm just using it to, it just does something to the EQ of the guitar going into the amp that just cleans up the bottom end and just shapes the mid-range really nicely. And then you can just use the volume output of the pedal to drive the amp harder if you want. But that's it. Like I never use any distortion pedals in front, and rarely anything else unless the guitar player really, really insists on it.
That's cool. There's a great music store just south of here called Mikey's Guitars. It's no longer there, but I bought my amp from Mikey years ago, and he said the same thing. He was sort of like, you take the pedal and put it in there and turn it on and off and bypass. Get a tone out of the amp first, then put the pedal in there on and off and bypass to begin with, so that it's not making any change or almost no change at all, and then start boosting it up and adding distortion from there. Because it's easy to just start out with a pedal making some massive change. Another weird thing that happens is people come in and the clean guitar sound is louder than the distorted guitar sound. They'll kick it out in the middle of the song and the guitar disappears.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, cool. So now how about, I know you just did give us a recording tip or hack or secret sauce, but I'll ask it again. How about sharing another recording tip, hack, or secret sauce that our rock stars can use right now, today, or this week on their next session?
I'm going to say, also relating to guitars, is for heavy guitars, use less gain. And it's kind of counterintuitive and it's weird to get used to at first, but I think lots of people record with way too much gain on their distorted guitars, and all of that fuzz and distortion eats up a ton of real estate in your mix, and obviously makes the guitars less clear. So I kind of got this tip from another good producer, and the tip I always tell people is dial in your amp, get the gain where you think it should be or where you normally would have it for like a live show, and then pull it back some more to the point where it's you almost feel like there's not enough and that you have to play a little bit harder to get that crunch out of it. And then just try tracking like that, and just trust me, even though it might seem like it's too weak or unnatural, track it like that, get the doubles left and right. And then I think you'll have a light bulb go off and be like, oh, this is how you get really clear sounding guitars that still sound heavy, but just very clear and tight.
Yeah, that's good advice. All right, now how about sharing with us a favorite hardware tool for the studio? Something that when you've got it on sessions, you're always glad you got it.
Well, I'd say, I'm trying to think of like what I would bring to any session. My Kensington
computer
trackball
screen.
mouse.
Yeah, exactly. I got one right over there.
Yeah.
In fact, I was just on tech support with Kensington, just seeing if they'd send me another one.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a must-have. But in terms of audio gear, I'd say the Distressor is one of my must-have pieces, and also the SansAmp Bass Driver DI. I'll do any record with bass tone with just that pedal.
Very cool. So that's the SansAmp pedal that you would put, on the floor and the stage, or is this the rack mount? Is it the same thing?
Either one I'm happy with. Even the plugin in Pro Tools is great, but yeah, it's called the Bass Driver DI pedal. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's geek out for just 1 sec on the Kensington trackball. Are you talking about the Turbo Mouse? Or is it a newer one?
No, it's not a newer one. It's like the big square blue with the 4 buttons around the side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Rockstars, it's actually a little bit older technology. I know there's all kinds of mouses and magic mouses and trackballs, with the red ball that's kind of hanging off the side slightly.
Yeah.
I'm Jordan, you're probably like me. I found that the old school one is just it's almost the size of an 8-ball when you're playing pool or cue ball. You can swap it out. I don't recommend it because I've tried that and it's too heavy, but you can. And then it's got 4 buttons around it. Tell us why we want to have those 4 buttons and how you use them.
I actually only use the 2 of the buttons just for my main click and the right click. Like I'm looking at it right now. It's on my thumb where I do the main click. It's like all worn down. I don't really use any of the quick commands for the other ones. It's just the mouse just with the ball. You can just fly around the screen. And once you get used to it, it's just so much faster and easier on your hand. You're not, because your wrist stays the same. You're just using your fingers. You're not like with a mouse moving your wrist all around the desk and stuff.
Yeah, or like a trackpad getting too tweaky or something.
Yeah, I used to get really sore. Yeah.
Let's see, the top left and right buttons on mine I've always used for zoom in and zoom out.
Oh,
I always
smart.
find that helpful.
Yeah.
And then the bottom right button I always used as Command E for separate region, but I had to kind of get rid of that because it was messing everybody up.
Yeah.
They kept ejecting hard drives when they were trying to right click on something.
Oh man. Yeah.
All right, cool. So now how about a favorite software tool for the studios?
I've got to say the Waves SSL channel is my favorite plugin ever. It's all over my mixes.
Okay, cool. And that basically, describe it to Rockstars if they haven't already seen it. What is it?
It basically mimics a channel from the old SSL consoles. So it's got filters, an EQ section, and a compressor section. So it's super, super useful, and it kind of has that bitey classic rock sound.
Okay, and then do you always have to sort of use the mouse to set the different EQ settings, or have you found any shortcuts for knobs you can grab in the studio that will replicate what you're seeing on the screen with that plugin?
No, I mean, I know you can do that, but I just use the mouse on it.
Okay. All right, cool.
Yeah.
Now, how about a resource for the business side of doing this? I mean, obviously you're an entrepreneurial spirit as well, but you've done this for a while. You've run a studio. What tips do you have for people? Maybe it's a resource, a person, a method, a technique.
Well, I mean, I guess in terms of like a software thing, I use this online accounting software called Wave. It's pretty easy to use. But in terms of just business in general, I have to be honest, when I was coming up in the studio, I was just so focused on making records, like, 12, 14 hours a day. I was pretty bad at the business side. Now I've obviously learned a lot more, but I would say a big thing is just not being afraid to say no to bad projects, and also to not be afraid to charge what you're actually worth. I think I went many years taking projects that didn't help my career at all past a certain point, and also just way undercharging for my work. And I think a big part of that too is like there's like a mindset thing. Like I think some people like a lot of my customers and stuff, they email me, if they've taken the course and they say, okay, how do I start getting better clients and stuff? And we'll kind of talk. And sometimes I'll realize that they're almost at this plateau it's really just like what they're charging that's holding them back. Because if you think about it, let's say you charge $200 a song to record and mix. Mm-hmm. A professional band is not even going to look at you, right?
Right.
Because they're just going to assume that your quality threshold is down at $200 a song, Right. And as soon as all you got to change is like, double that rate. And then all of a sudden you are potentially attracting a completely different level of artists. Right. So obviously there's a time for that, but.
So just a response to that too. Rockstars, it's not to say necessarily that you're delivering the exact same thing for two different rates, so much as it is to have the experience of the client who looks at it and goes, well, at $200, there's no way I'm going to be able to have a dialogue and do some tweaks and spend the time on it that we know it's going to need to get it right. But at $400, they might get a sense that, there's a little more room for really, tweaking the mix.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, I liked what also you said about the power of no.
Yeah,
I think that's really good. And that's a hard one to do, saying no to a lot of things because, you learn that it actually eats up your bandwidth, your time, your energy.
Yeah.
What about something that is typical, most people are going to run into it, which is there are going to be opportunities that come along with clients, bands that will let you do your thing with your production or your mix, but they may not be the more professional bands yet. What about that balance? So for example, I've seen sessions where I've had a new client comes in and they give me carte blanche for production and I really get to open my wings up. But then in the end, it's like they don't do anything with the record. It never really gets released or nobody notices it. What do you think is a good balance between those opportunities for your creative expression and the ones that say you really need all your clients to be high profile so that everybody's aware of your work?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a balance and it depends where you're at in terms of your career journey too. But I mean, for me, it was like maybe not necessarily about whether they're a high profile band or a recognized name. It was more about like I got to a point a few years in where I was like, okay, I'm not going to book anyone unless they send me a demo first. And once I heard the demo, I could tell kind of where the band was at skill wise. And if I could tell they couldn't play, if I could tell that the songwriting was just not good, then I would say no. And it's more, that's kind of what it's about for me. Like I'll gladly do a record for a band where they send me the demos and I love the songs and I just want to be a part of it, having no clue what's going to come out on the other side, whether they're going to get noticed. And I get the frustration. I've done records where I've poured a lot of effort into it. And then, we finished the record and a month later I found out the band broke up and nothing happens. It's a shame because you're like, I wanted people to hear that, but you still have that experience of working with good musicians and good songs, and you'll learn a lot every single project you do. So, there's a balance. But for me, it was not necessarily about the name so much, more just about whether the music was good.
Cool, man. Well, so now one of the things that we need to do in a studio too is people rely on us to stay organized. Do you have any good resources for ways to stay organized?
You mean in terms of just like running like booking sessions or
anything you want? I mean, this could be like an online tool that people should know about that you use all the time, or it might just be a way to, make sure that 2 years from now, you know exactly where that session is when somebody lost it and they come back to you for it. Yeah,
sure. I mean, in terms of booking, like I just keep it pretty simple now. I did have like a manager doing stuff for me at one point, but just have simple agreements and sheets that outline everything for clients. So I would have like a recording confirmation sheet that just says, okay, you're coming in these dates. This is when we're going to wrap. Or for mixing, it's going to be like, I'm going to be mixing between these dates. And just, I would say like figure out how much time you need to do a song typically and just stick to that. Like, don't be one of those guys who like has projects overlapping all the time because you'll always deliver stuff late and it won't be as good. Like, I always tried to make sure, like I would know that it took me on average about 2 days to track a song and about a half to 1 day to mix a song. So if I was, going to do 2 songs with the band, I'd book 2 days to track and 2 days to mix. And then I would book the next band right after that. So it was like, there was no wiggle room of like the band being like, hey, can we come back and like do stuff later? It's like, no, I got another band in. And you knew that before. And it also keeps you on track and doing projects quickly and not getting hung up on stuff, which I think is important.
Or the band can come back and do it, but you're going to have to wait until 2 weeks from now, you know?
Yeah, they'll wait, and they should pay more, you know, because that's their fault for going overtime.
Sure. Well, those are good insights, man. I appreciate that. Now, here's a hypothetical question. Let's say you had to start over again, which you did. You know, you kind of had to leave your studio and go reset up somewhere. Yep. You know, what simple setup should somebody think about for beginning their recording studio? How do they find people to record? And then what advice about making ends meet while they're doing this so that they don't have to, you know, give up and quit and they can really stay in the game and keep a studio going like you did?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, to get started, I mean, these days it's so much different than when I started. Like, you could get a decent, like an average MacBook, a simple interface, like maybe a duet or a quartet or something with a few inputs, a couple of 57s, or just rent some mics when you need to. And you've got like Pro Tools or something or whatever DAW you want to use for, you know, $30 a month or whatever. It's super affordable. So I'd just do a simple setup like that. And that's actually like what I have now at home to mix. Like I used to have, well, I still have my old rig, but I used to have like a HD2 Excel rig with everything. And now I'm literally just mixing on like with an Apogee Duet, and Pro Tools 12, and that's it.
That's
so
cool.
Like, I'm excited about that. And I certainly felt nervous moving from my bigger setup to this, feeling like, you know, what if I can't produce the same quality? But after I did a few mixes, I was like, wow, this is actually totally fine, and I'm totally confident with it. So yeah, I'd say don't get worried about, you know, having to have the most expensive gear off the bat. I certainly didn't. And yeah, I'd say just start looking for young and up and coming bands around you. Utilize whatever firsthand connections you have. So I always tell people, if you write music or you're in a band, like obviously that's the easiest place to start. Record and work on your own band stuff. And then through that, if you have friends who are in bands, you go for them too. And then one tip I give for people who are getting started, who have no clients and, you know, no one who's easy to reach out to for a project, I say, rather than saying, come and record your album with me or do your next project with me, even if it's for free, they'll probably turn you down. But if you offer them to do a free demo or a cheap demo instead, for me, it just kind of lowers the barrier almost. Like if you think of it from the artist point of view, if you're a no-name engineer, producer just coming up, like it's risky for them to decide to spend any money, even to spend time and do it for free with you, because they don't know that they can trust you to deliver a good product. So if you change just the wording and say demo, can I do a demo for you guys? It's just like the pressure's off, and you know, it changes the mindset of the band. Okay, like we're working on some songs, it'd be cool to get some rough demos. Yeah, we'll go in and do it for free. Why not? You know?
Yeah.
But then the key is to do a really good job on those demos, so that maybe when it is time for them to do it for real, they'll think of you. And I actually had that exact experience with Silverstein.
Well, that's great. And that's great advice. Yeah, I like what you said. When you're doing that demo, just over deliver, make it sound like a record.
Yeah.
Give them such a great experience. And there were a couple of takeaways from that too. One is that, I like what you said about lowering the bar, making it easier for them. Also, you offered something to them that they really need. Like, they're going to need to make a record, but that's a big need, and they're going to think carefully about that. It's going to feel like buying a house for a lot of bands, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas doing a demo is certainly a need, and that would be very helpful right now. So you're offering something that's helpful for them. And also the idea of offering something for free to somebody, hey, come make your record with me, and do it. And then thinking, oh, will they say yes? Will they say no? Am I undervaluing? Things like that. A lot of that is a me perspective, thinking it's all about me, this decision that they're going to make. And I want to encourage the rock stars, you guys, to remember that it's not about you. It's not about us. Not only is it, a risk for the band to record with you if they're not sure what the results are going to be, but it's actually an investment. It's not free for a group of people to put in the time it takes to come record with you and pour all their energy and their creativity and their time. You know, it's expensive, even just in if you've just got a band that 5 people have to take off work to do it, if that's the band that you're working with.
Yeah, exactly.
So great takeaway. All right, last question. This is the final one. This is hypothetical as well, but if you could go back, Jordan today, and give young Jordan advice, what would you tell yourself is the single most important thing you needed to know to be a recording studio rock star yourself?
Yeah, you know what? It literally goes right along with what you're just saying, and it would be that it's not about you. It's making a record is not about how many tricks you can do to make it sound perfect and how good you are at editing and stuff. I find like I've watched a lot of young up and coming engineers, and they know all the shortcuts. They know the tricks to make things sound really perfect and cheat all the cheats, but it's like the problem is that it's just about them. It's like they're just taking the band's music and doing it how they want to do it. And it ends up being so boring and just flat, and it's not about you as the engineer and how skilled you are and how many cool pieces of gear you could use. It's like, it's about the music. You got to start with the songs and then let that guide your decisions without obsessing over the gear and stuff.
Now, remember, this is you giving yourself advice. Jordan.
Yeah. I went through that stage because there was, I don't know if this is unique to this genre, but in this kind of heavy kind of metal stuff, there's a lot of younger bands out there who are kind of faking it because they know that you can fix everything in the studio. So they write stuff that is way beyond like their capability. So it very quickly does become like up to the engineer to fix it. And that's okay if you need to fix stuff. But I think the mistake that I did make for a short time was like just automatically taking that approach without really stopping to understand what the band was trying to do and where they were at, and almost like giving them a chance,
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Well, no, it does. And in a way, if you, unintentionally enable, I was going to say empower, but it's more of an enabling, right? If you enable a band to make a record that they can't possibly play live, you're almost guaranteeing that this band is going to break up shortly after you make the record, right?
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that's definitely a good point or not, but it just occurred to me, so I'm sharing it.
It's possible. I mean, I've seen some crazy things where like, obviously I'm not going to name names, but I've worked with bands and I've made their record sound good and just thinking in my head, like, there's no way they're going anywhere because they can't play.
Right.
And then next thing you know, they're blowing up. So, I mean, I think generally what you're saying is true, but you never know. It could happen, but
right. You can't predict. Once you're done making the record, it's out of your hands.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Can you let our listeners know how they can find you and learn more about you?
Yeah, I think the best place is just going to hardcoremusicstudio.com and signing up for my email list. I'm horrible at social media and all that stuff, so I'm not even going to throw that out there. So really how I connect with people is through my email list and the website there.
Groovy. And there's links, I believe, to the music that you're creating. I'm sorry that we're not playing it live on the podcast, but Rockstars, I highly encourage you to go check it out. It's some cool stuff. And it's like, it's so different from what I usually record that I hear it and I go like, man, I want to do some of that.
Yeah, it's fun. And if you want to jump into any courses and stuff too, there's multi-tracks and everything that goes along with that so that you actually could try some stuff out for yourself.
Very cool. And Rockstar, as a reminder, Jordan has been kind enough to create a great, simple mixing cheat sheet that you can, it talks about all the stuff we were referring to on the podcast. You can just download this, print it out, set it on the near you on your desk, near the console, or near your laptop, wherever you are. It's just some helpful reminders as you go into mixing to kind of, keep you feeling good about the direction you're heading. I know that EQ and compression settings can be very confusing and daunting when you first start out. So this is pretty cool. And you can get that, just go to rsrockstars.com/cheat sheet, and then you can just download it right from there. So, you put in your name and your email and then Jordan's able to just send it right to you. So Thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. You totally rock. And I look forward to seeing more of you around the studio or up in the Moose, the frozen moose lands of Canada one day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thanks, man. I really enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks again, Rockstars. Our guest is Jordan Valeriote from hardcoremusicstudio.com. Jordan, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you around the studio, dude.
Yeah, thanks.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.